Broadcasting from the campus of Salisbury University, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7, putting Delmarva first. It's time for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
The Obama era may officially have ended this week. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. This week, President Obama delivered his last State of the Union address to the nation. And while he spoke optimistically of the future, he was not above chiding the politicians of the present. And as the last images faded from the television screen, a rush to see who will replace him took center stage with a Republican presidential debate and the upcoming Iowa caucuses that would begin the race to the White House in earnest. To set the stage for the next phase of this year's presidential election, we have in our studio John Barkovich. He's a former head of the Republican Central Committee here in Wicomico County, and also Mike Prettle with the Wicomico County Democratic Club. And welcome to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, let me just, and I'll start with Mike Prettle here. So what did you make of the State of the Union address? Certainly last night it got a lot of heavy hits from Republicans, but what did you make of the president's address?
Well, I have to start off by saying I didn't watch too much of the Republican hits last night, so I don't know exactly what was said. I did watch the president's speech, and I actually have a copy of it. I thought typically that it was excellent, one of the best things that he's done. Matter of fact, Angus King, who's the nonpartisan senator from Maine, spoke after the speech and said he thought it was probably the best speech that Obama has given since his initial inaugural address 8 years ago. And I tend to agree, not that I've heard all of them, but I thought it was an excellent speech. And I'm a big fan of Obama's, and I thought it hit just the right tone. I think to his credit, he did not do what many presidents have done after serving 7 years in the office, and that is do sort of a victory lap talking about their various accomplishments and what have you. But typical of Obama, who takes the long view and who I think is very comfortable in what he has accomplished, which I think has been immense. He talked about the challenges that face the future president and threw a few lobs, I thought correctly, at the dialogue that's been going on around the country on the Republican side. I don't think he was unfair to anyone, and I think he has stated his positions. And I think he has made it very clear that in his judgment, as in mine, the country is in very, very good shape. Most of the naysaying that's been spewed by the Republicans over the campaign is, I think, incorrect, inappropriate, and and I think he laid it out pretty well. What he felt was the needs of the country in the future, and what he hopes the next president will be able to do.
Do you think he was sounded too optimistic, Mike?
No more optimistic than I am. I think, no, I mean, look, the Republicans have been finding all these things to complain about, telling us that the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And I just heard on NPR this morning, now Paul Ryan in Baltimore at the Republican rally saying, how can we be optimistic? What can we say that's good about the country? And they haven't been able to overcome the negativism that's been dished out by all of the Republican candidates for president.
John Barkovich, I suspect you take a slightly different view.
I do take a slightly different view. Traditionally, the State of the Union is the president reflecting on the current status of our country and what he's going to do during the next year to make our country better. And I didn't hear any of that. And all I heard was these kind of broad, wouldn't it be nice if, and no political reality. And it wasn't a victory lap because he has nothing to be victorious about. What has he passed in his 7 years with Democratic-controlled Congress? He's passed a stimulus bill that didn't do anything except drive up our deficit. We got Obamacare, which is beginning to implode. No question about that. He's got veterans who are just being treated poorly, and nothing's been done about it. We had, at the time he was speaking, American sailors were being taken prisoner by Iranians. And I'm going, what is the state of this country? And the State of the Union is certainly not good. And I think that's what the Republican candidates are trying to reflect. And I think the public is starting to realize that it's true. They haven't done anything. This president has accomplished little. Lots of grand ideas, lots of hope and change, but very little accomplishment that's been good for this country.
Mike Pretel?
Just to respond to the radiant captivation of these sailors, frankly, I thought that was almost humorous. The first I heard about it was when the Republican candidates were denouncing the government for being weak and for tolerating this, and these people are going to be held for months and they're going to be subjected to worse treatment than we're treating the prisoners in Guantanamo. They're going to be interrogated. And lo and behold, within 12 hours, John Kerry got them released. And did he hear any praise? Oh, no, this was a sign of America's weakness, that we have such a relationship with Iran now that we can negotiate the prompt and safe release of these prisoners. It's almost laughable that the Republicans are willing to throw all the blame at what they believe will be the mistreatment of these people and none of the credit for the people who brought them home very safely and very quickly.
International law was broken. International law was broken by the Iranians. International law, Geneva Convention. And to say that our country is so weak that the Iranians are not afraid of us, I think is a problem.
John, I could just imagine what would happen if 2 boatloads of armed Muslims came up to our shore and were captured by the Coast Guards. Are you saying, gee, we would have read them their rights and given them
if you want to compare U.S. naval officers to armed Muslim terrorists, I'd be happy to have that conversation with you.
I want to bring in now Michael Laughlin. He's a political science professor from Salisbury University, also peace activist, and smiling just a bit at the conversation that's taking place. What did you make, by the way, of the president's address the other night?
I think it was a sign that he, I would actually agree with John on this point, that he gave up, there was no sense of hope that he could resolve the stalemate with Congress, that there's a whole laundry list of initiatives that he's laid on Congress's plate, none of which have been eaten, and their appetite doesn't seem to be there. So I think he went for a more philosophical portrayal of what he wanted. He used the forum to try to push for a more calm, a more deliberate discussion going into the campaign. I think it was actually more of a campaign mode speech rather than a policy-oriented speech, and trying to lay down some markers and some parameters for what he hopes, of course, would be a Democratic victory come the fall.
Do you think that he painted an optimistic picture, or do you think it was? I mean, one of the things that struck me was that it seemed as if, yes, he pointed to what he felt were accomplishments, and he did certainly try to put in what he saw as perspective in terms of threats around the world and some of the economics here at home. But there was sort of a grimness, I thought, in some ways, about where we are. I mean, I think I'm seeing a agree with John. I think there was a certain grimness about, yes, we've plowed along, we've done these things. I'm sure he would disagree with some of John's assessment, but he's, and we have more to do. I mean, did you get that sense at all? I mean,
I agree with that. I think that he wanted to lay claim, and I think rightly so, that he and his administration brought the U.S. economy out of the worst recession since the Great Depression. And Republicans don't wish to give him that credit, but I think they're inaccurate in that respect. On the other hand, he did also say there's much still to be achieved, particularly with regard to the questions of inequality, the questions of wages, and so on and so forth. And I think that, so he was really saying, well, that has to be done. So it was I think a realistic portrayal of where we have to go. But I think he would claim that and defend, and he attempted to do this, that we were on a right track moving forward, and that we don't need the kind of divisive rhetoric and the kind of divisive campaign that Mr. Trump and Mr. Cruz and the Republicans are bent on pursuing.
But the country doesn't believe we're on the right track. The polls suggest that what you've just said is not true. The country believes that government has failed. The federal government has failed.
Well, in that respect, John, the public is in error. I mean, public opinion does not mean truth. The truth of the matter is, I think from an analytical point of view, this is not a partisan point of view, the deficit spending, let me finish please, the deficit spending of the administration, right, brought around the economy. Even Dick Cheney, Dick Cheney at one point said deficits don't matter.
I'll give you that point.
So the Keynesian position on the importance of the federal government in bringing about economic recovery is a tried and true remedy for resolving those questions. So in that respect, right, to the extent that the public is misperceiving the reality, they're misperceiving the reality.
The public doesn't see a good economy.
You're right.
They don't see a good economy. The public sees terrorists killing Americans.
Okay.
The public sees everything in this country not working.
John, what has happened
is... who do they blame? They have to blame the
What has happened is the Republican Party came up with a strategy, which goes back to Newt Gingrich, to let's bring down the government and then blame the Democrats for doing so. So they have dumped all this negative stuff about how terrible we are, how deficit-ridden we are, how the terrorists are they're hide behind every bush and this sort of thing, saying all these bad things, and then say, oh, gee, the public is buying our spiel. We don't have any real solutions, but we will at least throw out some platitudes saying we can do better. I can make this country great again. I'm not going to tell you how, because that's my big secret, but I can make it look how bad it is. But it is a doctrine that the Republican Party has deliberately, and this is Karl Rove's great idea, that let's scare people. Let's make people fear and hate other people, and we can create enough dissension that we then can come in and say we can save you from all of this, and we don't have to tell you how.
Let me, because this draws me something that I heard. South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley delivered, of course, the response. And we're going to play two clips. One is President Obama. That's then followed by the governor from South Carolina. And there is a resonance here between the two of them that just really struck me. That's why I wanted to put these two together.
It's one of the few regrets of my presidency that the rancor and suspicion between the parties has gotten worse instead of better. I have no doubt a president with the gifts of Lincoln or Roosevelt might have better bridged the divide. And I guarantee I'll keep trying to be better so long as I hold this office. But my fellow Americans, this cannot be my task or any president's alone.
While Democrats in Washington bear much responsibility for the problems facing America today, they do not bear it alone. There is more than enough blame to go around. We as Republicans need to own that truth. We need to recognize our contributions to the erosion of the public trust in America's leadership. We need to accept that we've played a role in how and why our government is broken.
I want to turn to John Barkovich. Do you agree with the South Carolina governor, and what fashion? Because in that speech as well, she did then list a whole bunch of things that she said, no, we would do something different. We will strongly disagree with the president. So I'm not sure whether she was talking about tone, policy, process. How did you read it?
Well, I read that as being that the Republicans have not, from my point of view, have not done enough to try and offset some of the mistakes, errors, and problems that have occurred. And part of that's because they haven't been able to accomplish anything through the Senate. So the Congress on the Republican side has tried to do things, haven't gotten anything accomplished. And as a Republican, conservative Republican, I'm saying, yeah, I don't think my boys have worked hard enough either. I think they should have shut the government down, done other things to get things turned around to the way they and I wanted accomplished. That being said, I don't see how the president can't take some of the responsibility for the rancor that he has brought forward, because he has never tried to work with Congress. I mean, he gives these great plans and ideas and then doesn't do anything in Congress to try and get them achieved. He has been outside of the congressional action in terms of getting something done. He has these great platitudes, great ideas, but does he go to Capitol Hill and try and get anything done? No, he hasn't. And so Nikki Haley was responding to the Republican establishment's concept of we need to tone it down a little bit.
Do you think, because you were talking about, you thought, for instance, they should shut down the government as one example. Right. I'm just wondering whether or not Nikki Haley is not coming in from the opposite point of view, that these are the kinds of things we shouldn't have been doing, that we have to have some responsibility for the inability of government to work.
No,
Do you think?
I think that's what she was saying.
Yeah,
what I'm
but you
saying
would
from the
disagree,
other
though.
side is
Yeah.
that I don't think our Republicans did enough to try and change the course of government. And that's not what she was saying. I agree. She was taking the establishment Republican position of we need to accept some of the blame for the problems. And I won't argue that.
Mike Bertle?
Well, no, I mean, I think she was stating the common sense position that that the Republicans have cast a pall over the whole political process. I disagree, and we've had this disagreement in the past about whether the president has attempted to reach out to the Republicans. Certainly, when the Healthcare for All, when the Affordable Care Act was first begun, there were efforts to meet with them. When the shutdowns of the government took place, when just the recent budget talks, the president has met with them. But I mean, as you know, John, from day one, the Republicans made it very clear that job one was to bring down the presidency and to make sure that Obama doesn't serve a second term. And it's pretty difficult to talk about, how come he didn't come to us and compromise with us when we made it very clear we don't want to work with him? And I think the Republicans did make that clear from the very beginning.
They did, and look what they've done. They've taken over governorships. They've taken over state legislatures. They've taken over the South in the 7 years that this fella has been the president of the United States. So, yes, he won popular vote both times, but the Democratic Party behind him, they have lost big. The Republican majority now is higher than it's been since, 1703? And whose fault is that? You got to put that on your president's
John,
shoulders.
as you probably know, there were more Democratic votes for Congress this time around than there were Republican votes. And even though the Republicans control the House, they don't control the votes just as a result of gerrymandering and as a result of the Republican efforts to diminish the vote that's happened. So you can't really say that that the populace is very much in the Republican camp.
I want to go to Professor O'Loughlin.
Yes.
How do you see this? But put on your professor's hat for a moment. How do you see this gridlock that's taking place? I mean, some people have. I think a book was written, but it's the worst that they've ever seen in terms of gridlock and partisanship. How do you read this? If you kind of step back,
I think there's truth to that. In previous decades, the effort by Obama, particularly to meet with Boehner, and the infamous or famous, depending on how you look at it, the grand deal that was going to be struck in previous decades, that would have gone down. I mean, that would have happened.
right? The budgetary
Because the Speaker of the House, Republican Speaker of the House, would have had sufficient support and commitment to government working. Whereas today, I think because of, and here I think there's, I think Haley's, I'm glad you really raised Haley's comments, because there's a big split within the Republican Party that's continuing to emerge, right? And Haley represents those folks who would sign on to that kind of agreement that Obama tried to reach with Boehner. Whereas the more conservative, and I would call it a more reactionary rump of the Republican Congress, of the House, it brought that speaker down, and is committed really to making government not really work very well, because that is in their ideological perspective, the government should have very little role to play. I mean, there should be no minimum wage. There should be very few, if any, regulations, and so on and so forth. And I think that is what we're seeing here. And what that means for the future, I'm unsure, because it depends on what happens with the Republican Party. I think there is more conflict and consternation within the Republican Party today than there is in the Democratic Party. The parallels made between Trump is dealing with the right-wing populists and Sanders with the left-wing, that has little fundamental truth to it. That doesn't, because I think ultimately the Democratic Party has a better chance of mobilizing and coalescing than does the Republican Party.
Let me ask you this. Let me press it. Do you think this is a matter of a difference in strategy as opposed to policy? I mean, it seems to me that the Tea Party folks and even the establishment, there's pretty much connection. I mean, I can't, they all talk about tax cuts and the rest of it. I mean, do you think that there's that kind of ideological difference, or is this a difference over strategies? I mean, John was saying a moment ago, he would favor, for instance, shutting down the government, right? But I'm not sure that John's political positions are all that different than, say, somebody who, say, is in the Tea Party, which I don't think he considers himself to be part of the Tea Party. So, I mean, is it more strategy rather than necessarily issues?
I don't think you can disengage the two. Frankly, I think that shutting down the government was part strategy in terms of showing failure. Right?
It was a strategy to accomplish the task.
Right.
Right.
But additionally, I think those folks are saying, "Hey, the government's not working. The government is not operating. That's good because we don't really want much government." Right? To the extent that we can slash and cut agencies and funds and budgets and so on, and have less and less government, that is ideologically consistent for that part of the Republican Party.
I agree with Mike that it's strategy which has become, I mean, frankly, the Trump phenomenon is a perfect example, a perfect result of that. Because, as I said before, I think people like Gingrich and Rove and what have you were working purely on strategy. They would get their way as Republicans by inflaming the masses to believe that all sorts of things were happening that were bad, okay? And they've created a Donald Trump who is taking it to the nth degree, and now they don't know what to do with him. That's why the mainstream Republicans are so panicky, because they've created a monster.
I think
basically.
they're coming around. They're starting to realize that Trump may do this deal. The issue for me, though, is that all the people on the stage last night, from Trump, Cruz, the right side of the party, and Rubio, down to Christie, and he's about as Republican. They all said
he's a rhino. Is that what you're saying?
I was going to say rhino. Okay, the statement that he helped Obama get elected last time. Well, anyway, the point is though that all the people on that stage were still talking the same things. They were still talking about national.
They have to.
They
have to.
But that's the key. The point I'm trying to make is that all of them, but the entire spectrum, are all still trying to deal with the same concept of we have to reform our tax system to get the economy boosted. We have to do something about the Muslim jihadist issues. We have to strengthen the military. We have to show strength overseas. I mean, they all said that. Now, they said it in different ways, but those were concepts that all of them ascribed to. So then you say, well, does it really make any difference which of the 8 runs? You still have to have somebody that's going to carry the message that has appeal across the spectrum. And that's where I think Trump comes in, is that he has appeal across a larger spectrum than some of the more rhino Republicans.
Let me follow up on this one issue, which is that it's very clear that the folks in the Tea Party and that sort of creation, right, they certainly don't like government, but they've also expressed, at least through Trump, that they do not like big business. They don't like Wall Street. They think that the 1% or whatever it is, that they're getting away with something. They not only do they not like big government, they don't like big business. And yet the Republican Party has been at least one of the favorite vehicles politically for big business. Is there a conflict going on there between those two wings? This populist movement that we are seeing coming out of Trump isn't just about government itself, but now they're beginning to turn their attention against business, which has been the backbone of the Republican Party for many years.
Oh, there's no question about that.
Yeah.
And business people still realize that jobs come from businesses. They don't come from the government. And so I think Trump he has a business background, no question about it. And I think he's the one candidate who might be able to meld the concept of yes, there may be some excesses. Okay, no one might know them better than he, and I will do what I can to rein in those excesses. And still, I want to further business because that's what drives our economy. So I think he can handle that. I think other Republicans can do that as well. And in terms of big money, Hillary's foundation, that's where the big money is.
Let me. I want to return to the State of the Union address for one other final thing, which is that the president seemed to dip himself into the campaign itself. I want to go to the last cut here, the Obama campaign cut, in which he chides directly both Chris Christie and I believe I want to say Ted Cruz about the issues that they are promoting within the campaign. So let's take a listen to that.
As we focus on destroying ISIL, over-the-top claims that this is World War III just play into their hands. Masses of fighters on the back of pickup trucks, twisted souls plotting in apartments or garages, they pose an enormous danger to civilians. They have to be stopped. but they do not threaten our national existence. That is the story ISIL wants to tell. That's the kind of propaganda they use to recruit. We don't need to build them up to show that we're serious. And we sure don't need to push away vital allies in this fight by echoing the lie that ISIL is somehow representative of one of the world's largest religions. Some of these places may become safe havens for new terrorist networks. Others will just fall victim to ethnic conflict or famine, feeding the next wave of refugees. The world will look to us to help solve these problems. And our answer needs to be more than tough talk or calls to carpet bomb civilians. That may work as a TV soundbite, but it doesn't pass muster on the world stage.
First, we want to mention that House Speaker Paul Ryan described the president's address as degrading the presidency because he was talking about primary politics. I want to go to you first, John. What do you make of that this State of the Union really did dip into this election season?
Well, I don't think it's the place of the president in the State of the Union to delve into politics and the race that's currently going on in the Republican Party. I think that was a mistake. And I think it does lower the concept of what the State of the Union is and the importance of the presidency and the president as a leader. Having said that, the arguments that he raises, I think the Republican Party has said very clearly that what the Obama policies for the last number of years have led to ISIS, and we've never said that all Muslims are bad. Even Trump admits that all Muslims aren't bad. He says that there are some Muslims who are terrorists, and they are bad, and we need to do something about them. And I think the lack of leadership that our president has done in terms of ISIS is what has resulted in this desire on the part of Republicans to be more forceful. And I think the country recognizes that. And San Bernardino only supports that concept.
Mike Prettle?
Well, I say you seem to be saying that, the president had a valid point, but he shouldn't be saying it because it was raised also or wrongly raised by some of the candidates on the Republican side. I mean, I think it was perfectly appropriate. Matter of fact, it's funny because I read this morning Paul Ryan's comments about how inappropriate this was, and then he went off and saying he basically agrees with the president on most of these things, and we really do have to tone down the rhetoric. I don't see why why it was not appropriate for the president, who was looking to, as I indicated earlier, to the future as to the policy that his successor would have to carry out, why it's not appropriate for the president to say that I hope the guy that succeeds me is not going to be rattling sabers with respect to the entire Muslim world, as some of the candidates seem to be suggesting they would if they were elected. And that seems to me the most appropriate thing he could possibly say about foreign policy today.
If carpet bombing would have prevented San Bernardino, I would have gone for it.
Carpet bombing whom?
Carpet bombing.
The city of San Bernardino?
Carpet bombing the core of the terrorist network. And if carpet bombing had been done 2 years ago, it might have prevented San Bernardino.
We have dropped 1,000 bombs. I mean, how many? You want 2,000 bombs? Is that going to do it?
They take out 10,000 bombs, drop 1,000, and bring the other 9,000 back because they aren't released to use them.
Fine. Look, nobody has the strategy to deal with the Middle East. I mean, and I haven't heard any of the candidates do it except in platitudes.
Chris Christie's carpet bombing may be just as good as what we have.
Michael Laughlin.
Two observations. One is I think that it's funny that John is critical of Obama for dealing with the question of ISIS in his State of the Union speech. He's defending his policy. That's policy. And he's talking about defending that and trying to set, as in terms of his own perspective, the reality of ISIS, right? That what kind of threat is it? Is it a threat? Yes. How much of a threat? Well, it's really not a fundamental threat to our existence as a state, as a country. So I think it was entirely appropriate, and actually, in this respect, I do agree with Obama to try to place the threat of terrorism of this sort in perspective and calm down the unreasonable fears that the Republicans wish to push. I mean, that's clearly what they're about. The other comment I'd make is, John, if you're encouraging carpet bombing, you're encouraging war crimes. Because carpet. Let me finish the point. Because carpet bombing does not distinguish.
I understand.
Between a threat and innocent civilians.
I understand.
So when Cruz, and now you've included yourself in this kind of rhetoric, you're encouraging war crimes, and that's fascist. That's fascist language.
The issue for me is that the
John.
policy has failed. The Obama policy has failed. The American people have seen beheadings, have seen people burned to death, and that's as un-American as carpet bombing possibly.
Okay, ISIS beheads. Our great ally, Saudi Arabia, routinely beheads people, right? I don't hear.
We don't show that on television.
We don't show that on television, and I don't hear any critique coming out of the Republican Party, or for that matter, the Democratic Party, with regard to that. So, if you want to call ISIS barbaric, I agree with you. Beheading is barbaric. Well, let's call a spade a spade. Then the Saudis are engaging in barbaric behavior as well, and we should condemn them as well as ISIS. But you don't want to have it that way, and most Democrats,
That's within a legal
Democratic
system.
establishment.
There's a
doesn't
big
either.
difference between a legal system in Saudi
Oh,
Arabia, okay, and terrorists killing people for no reason.
They killed for very good reasons. They were trying to advance their ideology, the same way the Saudis were trying to advance their ideology. Matter of fact, the recent beheadings were to advance their ideology, not for any legal reason or any reason of violation of law. They were trying to silence, as I recall,
a Shia
opponent
cleric
of the
who was just
the
speaking.
administration. Yeah.
Yes.
We've been speaking with John Barkovich. He's the former head of the Republican Central Committee here in Wicomico County. Also, Mike Prettle, who was with the Wicomico County Democratic Party, and also Michael Laughlin. He's a political science professor at Salisbury University and a peace activist. This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
This has been Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Chris Rank produces and is our audio engineer. Don Rush is your host. For podcasts, visit our website, delmarvapublicradio.net, or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on PAC 14. To view the schedule, view the daily times, or visit pac14.org.